Hello, beautiful light-filled souls. My name is Trisha Barker, and I am so excited to be here with you for another interview with a near-death experiencer. Ishtar Ishaya is here to talk about his amazing near-death experience at a very young age and all the insights that he gained from that, and his meditation practice, and also his intuition that developed from this. I do want to remind you, I have writing workshops available. So if you are interested in writing a book, I love to support people on that journey. And it's been a lot of fun getting together with people on Zoom. Check out the dates in February. And also, please check out the link for my book, Angels in the OR. It's been 25 years in the making since I had my near-death experience. So I'm happy to share this with you. But let's get right to the interview. Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm very well.
Great. Well, I read a little bit about your near-death experience, and I know that I've seen you talking in different forums, but I'd really love it if you would just jump in and tell and set the scene for your near-death experience and then kind of take me through it. I love that energetic feel that I get when I hear about someone's near-death experience.
Okay, and please cut in whenever you need to, so to sort of structure the flow of this.
Awesome.
But I guess maybe I'll do a shortened version, a bit of a truncated version, get right to it. As a child, I'd had a lot of spiritual experiences from the time I was very small, even in the crib. But at about age 7, I kind of made the decision that I wanted to sort of assimilate and fit into society and develop a personality. So, like everybody at about that age, I really started to kind of get lost and becoming sort of more of the egocentric perception, and then things were going really well. I had a really wonderful nuclear family. It was, school was, academically was going very well. I had all these aspirations that are maybe perhaps more normal than what my life turned out afterwards to be. And so then I'm 13. I'm in middle school, and it's the second to the last day of school, and or the night before actually is when it really kind of got started. I was actually playing a baseball game, and I got hit by a pitch. I didn't dodge it, and apparently it got me right on the arm and in a place that it broke it. And so we went and we realized that I had a broken arm, and I was at home, and that was my big complaint that was on my mind. I'm going to miss baseball season this summer. And so I was talking to my mother, like I often did, um, before going to bed, and kind of going over the summer and the next day. And all of a sudden, one of those flashes that I had throughout childhood, that's like lightning, an intuitive flash, just came through me and just popped right out my mouth without any sort of thinking or mediation. And it was, "Mom, are you going to die soon?" That, and it I had never had I'd never had any concerns with my mother's health. My father, yes, because mayonnaise and bologna sandwiches at that young age I knew were not a good pathway. Uh, all that Diet Coke, it did not seem good. So I was often worried about my father, but never my mother. And so it really struck me when it came out of my mouth, and it struck my mother. I kind of noticed her just kind of seize up for a second, and then she kind of came to composure and said, "No, I'm going to be around for quite some time. You'll be able to grow up with me." And so then I felt calmed down, and I said, "Okay, okay." And then I went to bed, and then the next morning I woke up, and like a cartoon character, I just went from horizontal to a 90-degree angle, right as my parents were walking outside my door. And I was out of breath. I was panting, and it was as if I'd just run into my body from somewhere else. And I was like, I have something I have to tell you. It's just so anxious about this, and I couldn't remember it, and I was so distraught that I was like, I can't remember what it is. I can't remember it. It's like I was running, and some scroll fell out of my back pocket, and I left it behind. And so they had to take about 5 to 10 minutes to calm me down, because I was so distraught. And so they did, and I went to the second to the last day of school, and I went to the awards ceremony, picked up a bunch of awards, um, came home, was hanging out with my mom, watching a movie. Then we took my sister to her new job out at the movie theater on the edge of town. It was her college summer job. And as we're pulling out and going to cross one of those 4-lane divided highways, it was pretty normal. It was clear that we weren't going to get hit by any cars. But as it so happened, there was another car that was sort of hidden by 2 cars that were going the speed limit that was, just for those few seconds, going about 20 miles per hour over. And so we were driving, and I was, passenging, and I was looking to my left to talk to my mother. And then at that moment, just would have been only about, it was right about to hit us. I saw this big gray Lincoln right there, and it was so close and going so quick that my mind had, time to register a couple thoughts. And the first one was shit, and it's like,
Right.
oh shit, And the second one, instead of seizing up and panicking immediately, my whole system calmed down. I started finding myself going into this expanded state of consciousness, which I'd known throughout childhood, especially before age 7. And the thought kind of came to my mind, I really thought this one was going to go more than 13 years. But I pretty much felt, through my whole body, oh, the jig is up,
Oh no.
this is it,
The
this
end.
this is the end, and I was cool with that. I was completely relaxed, and right after I had that thought, then the whole life flashing before one's eyes happened. And up to that point, I was fascinated when I'd read about this phenomena or hear about it. I thought, is that even possible? And sure enough, here it was, just like a reel. Only this time, there was a sense that I was connected with this totally omniscient, completely objective part consciousness, which I had known through life. I'd often have kind of arguments with it, and it would get to kind of come in and say, like, no, don't do that. And it's like, oh, shut up, shut up, I'm going to do it my way. And of course I'd get into some sort of trouble when I'd kind of go against the advice there. But only here it was as if I was completely united with it, and completely falling back into this vast spaciousness and letting go of everything. And as we sort of, we or I or whatever, we looked through my life together, any place where there was some sort of holding on, any place where I was wearing a mask or I was acting out of fear, any grudges that I held or was holding on to, they were all seen clearly and then just forgiven,
Did
and
you feel
just
like you were judging yourself, but the consciousness was not judging you, or was it some
um,
combination of?
I at that point, it was as it was as if the I was completely absorbed into that vaster consciousness, or nearly
Mm.
completely. There was no harshness to the judgment. It was so matter of fact, and
Yeah.
just, and it was very palpable. It was like I was taking a fully experiential trip back through life, and it was as if every place of tightness or tension or resistance, which, well, was the judgment, where the pretense, all of those were clear that there was some sort of resistance against the river of life and where it was trying to take me. And it was taking me where it wanted anyways. I was just, I was just not enjoying the ride. And
Oh.
so it's like, along with sort of the seeing of that aspect, there was a palpable release throughout my whole body. And so it felt kind of like, in my case, it felt like there was this thin skin that had been on me my whole life that I'd never noticed. And as I was releasing all of it, it felt like it was being taken off me, like the skin of a snake. And with each step, there was just such a vast opening and such a vast peace and joy and like a bliss. And when we got to the end, it was just the sense of being immersed in a field of infinite love. There was a sense that love, awareness, clarity, bliss, joy, they were all just different words that were pointing to the same fundamental um, layer of being. And I remembered that, God, it couldn't have taken much more than a second or two to, from the time of seeing the car to get whacked, but it felt like an eternity was in there.
Yeah, and it's interesting how a lot of people don't realize that they're dying or near death until they're outside of their body. But you had this consciousness, like as the car was coming, you were like, "Uh oh, this is over," and then went into that place. And did you? So what happened next?
So, so, so what it was kind of like, how I often describe it is that there was no sense of having to go anywhere to maybe see like the kingdom of heaven or the
Right.
fundamental reality that's hidden behind the veils. It was as if all the veils were removed from my experience. And even when I looked at the dashboard or my mother's shoulder, everything that was in my sort of perceptual view at the time, the sky, the beautiful clouds that were present that day, the face of the driver who seemed to not necessarily be knowing what was happening, because I don't remember those brakes going on, um, and there was a sense that underneath all of this was this vast light and this vast presence, and there was a sense that you know I was no longer simply just in this particular body, but I felt myself in all of those things, just as this vast presence that was spread everywhere. And then, yeah,
So it
that's
kind of sounds like you had a oneness experience and a God experience, and a lot of things just like compressed into one moment.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's really very interesting because
Yeah.
that oneness is what a lot of people experience in stages, but it really sounds like yours was like this atomic blast of like everything, in that one moment.
Yeah. It was a very multi sort of dimensional, multi-layered thing, but yeah, it was all pretty much there. And so it was like, being in the kingdom of heaven. And I recognized, I don't even know if I was thinking, but I remember movements of awareness during this. There's a recognition that this is life. This is this, state of freedom, this state of not holding on and not having all these barriers and masks. This was what life was meant to be. There was this sense, and there was this knowing and recognition in my heart, as well, of all the times that in my life that I had touched this place, and many of them I was actually conscious that I was touching a place, and there were other times where it was like, the music was playing, I was dancing to it, but I was unconscious that, of the particular song that was moving me. And so then, that was there, and then, whack. um, and
And you
yeah.
alluded to knowing just as you're about to die, like you've done this before. Did you have an awareness of many lives when you were on the other side, or?
No, no. In fact, I probably wasn't so perspicacious. I was so distracted by the sense of this beautiful, beautiful sense of, being everywhere with one light, that um, it was just a total experience. And
Hmm.
and it's funny about the other side, that I don't want to digress too much, but as a child I'd had a lot of experience with that
Yeah.
sort of stuff, like ghosts and things like that. Especially as a young child, I would, like, they'd come into my room, and then I'd go into this meditation, and then, invoke the light, and then they'd be gone. And so there was
Hmm.
always a kind of a dance with that side. But there at a certain point there wasn't that sort of fundamental sense of oneness, in which there was, no fear possible.
Right.
And
Right.
so it was that might have been one of the most important facets of the, experience in the accident, was the complete lack of I couldn't even be afraid.
Wow.
I couldn't at all. And yeah.
And then I do want to get to the reality of what happened. So, what happened to your body and what happened to your mom, and, how bad was the accident? And did you stay in that place, or did you have to come, and be traumatized and experience it
um,
all?
both, maybe both. Both. And yeah, there was definitely whack, and I remember, a little bit before, I was certainly concussed, and I knew I
Yeah.
was concussed because I didn't know my name.
Oh,
And I
wow.
remember, like, we were hit. I hit my head on the window, but it didn't break, and I didn't have any bruising. So that was interesting. I remember the whack of, and then I was knocked out, but there was no bruising, there was no damage on my body. I mean, the my gallows humor here, we were headed to the same hospital where we ended up anyways, which is weird, strange, because we were going to get a cast on my right arm, because it was broken.
Oh.
I had it in a sling, and that wasn't further damaged, except I ended up breaking my middle finger. And so I went the summer with a cast that on my arm that had an extension there. So it was kind of funny, I couldn't like miss the humor of that. And people
Right.
signed the cast, and they said they thought that was cool too, being
Right.
teenagers. Um, and that was part of my general attitude, having just lost my mother. Was I went. Well, I'll backtrack a little bit. Won't get ahead of the story, but yeah, I came to, and we were pretty well far from where the impact happened. There was a lot of force involved there, and my mother got the bulk of it. And I remember waking up, coming to the sound of the seatbelt dinger going off, and my mother had very labored breathing. She got all that energy, and the car was pretty well totaled, and they were using the big skill saw. I suppose they call them jaws of life, but it was a saw, so I don't know if they're two different kinds of tools. But anyways, they were having to cut the doors off, and so I remember the doors being cut off, and then paramedics coming in and very carefully handling my body, making sure they thought I reckon I probably had some neck injury or something, and so they were getting me out of there and getting us both onto stretchers. And I remember the view of the paramedics and the view of the sky again, as I was coming to, and they were asking me my name, and I was saying, like, I'm sorry, I really have no idea that answer, but that she's my mother. I know that, and that was the only thing I really knew. And
Yeah.
they took us into the ambulance, and like I suppose a lot of people, while I was in the shoulder strap in the gurney, I had sort of 2 points of awareness. So there was the normal awareness of being in your body and kind of looking up at the people asking you questions and putting the flashlight over your eye and talking to you, keeping you there. But there was also this sense of, again, this sort of diffuse non-locality to my consciousness. I felt like I was also looking down on my body from the ceiling, but also I felt myself in the sky and in the people and in my mother. And she spoke to me a couple times. She was really struggling. I could hear her breathing. That was um, the almost the main facet of experience was I was paying attention to that. And she called my name out twice, and I said, "I'm okay, Mom," twice. And on the second time, I felt her register it, and she immediately, her breathing went from this really labored breathing to this just like letting it go, letting it all go. And I felt her, when she was speaking to me, there was a sense of her words and where they were coming from were within me as well. So the best I can explain that, we felt like we were floating in the same basic substance which united us. And so
Some people might call that, if does she die right there, like a shared death experience or the beginning of one, like you were.
she may have, because I felt her leave, and
Yeah.
I didn't register that as death.
Yeah.
I was a little bit foggy in my faculties at the time, but I felt as her breath went out, I felt her kind of, as if sort of rising out of that body, or just becoming sort of diffuse
Mm.
herself. And so I didn't know that meant that she was dead. And the next thing I knew, I'm being wheeled into a hospital room, and I know that they're trying to save my mother's life behind some curtains back there. I couldn't look or see, because they still thought I might be really, I was number two. She was clearly damaged, but they thought that I also might have some serious spinal type things. And so I was down on a gurney. And then the next I knew, my sister's there, and she's got her out of her workplace, and she's with me. And then my dad comes out, and he says, "I'm sorry, your mother's gone." And that was just there I'm back in my body and human emotions again. And I'm absolutely like somebody took a medicine ball and threw it into my stomach as hard as they could. And I'm just crying, and we're sort of, they realized I didn't have any injuries, and so I'm up out of the gurney, and we're walking out the hallway, and the Lutheran social services people are there with well-intentioned hugs that I wasn't necessarily interested in. Just
Right.
wanted to kind of have my freedom of movement, and to kind of go out and we're picked up by friends of the family and brought home, and it's just just there's that emotional devastation that's there, that's totally raw, and at the same time there is this vast consciousness, which at that point my faculties were coming back, and I thought, oh, this must be shock. This is the shock I've heard about.
Yes,
And
yes. And your story reminds me a little bit of Jeff Olson's story, like the car wreck and the profound loss, of someone that at the same time. So it's really interesting to go through both at the same time. Usually, when people have a near-death experience, it's all about themselves and their body and their recovery, but you had grief and a near-death experience and the shock and the trauma, and you were young. What fascinated me is that you used meditation to find peace, but how long before you got into that space? Was that right away, or did you, have a year or so of just grief and shock? Or
well, one of the interesting things was right after the I knew it wasn't shock afterwards. It was interesting. That sort of sense of oneness and that sort of sense of this kind of vast dimension, that it was there. And even though it was like I was going through all of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, just like a textbook,
right?
just like, whoa, she knew what she was talking about. This is
Yes.
happening, and I'm not doing anything to make this is just going on. The organism is
Oh,
doing,
yeah,
yeah.
I know what you mean. Like, I was shocked. We think that maybe if you have a near death experience, you're beyond it. So when I lost my dad, I remember like food didn't taste good. I remember that first bite, and I was like, oh, I'm depressed. Like, and
Yeah.
just, okay, there's that.
Yeah, for me there was this dual experience. So it was like having the waterfall of emotion happening, but at the same time there was this vast cave that I was sitting in. I wasn't, and I wasn't like a detached, I wasn't detached from life. I was closer to it. I wasn't, there was this vast silence, and I realized, I thought, what is this? It's like, after it lasted for more than a week, I'm saying, like, this ain't shock. And then the other interesting thing was that when I could play with it, I could feel it in others. I could see it in the trees. When I could put my attention more into it, kind of like I could take my mind off of the thoughts and the feelings, and I could relax back into the space. And when I would do that, bliss and joy would just flood my body. And I'm saying, like, you're not supposed to be feeling bliss and joy. This is peculiar. It was, because there was clearly a the damaged psyche of a 13-year-old who'd lost their mother, but at the same time there was this bliss and joy, and even just ancient wisdom and intuitive and heightened intuition and perceptions, and heightened empathy, and in a sense, like, people weren't fooling me anymore. I see more deeply into them. And
Yes,
yeah.
yes. I know what you mean. And isn't that incredibly powerful? It's a powerful gift, I think, that we can give people in the midst of the worst suffering, though you still can access that. I mean, and that's what your story teaches us. And I think that's part of what my story teaches people too, is like in the midst of horrific moments,
Yes.
you still can find that
Yeah.
bliss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, I might have required that to happen,
Yeah.
because I could see that if my mother hadn't died, I would probably have not reached some of the places that I've gone back to so quickly, because the motivation simply might not have been there. I could have coasted in a very relatively happy and outwardly successful kind of life, and who knows. But the wound within the wounds are the blessings for so many of us. And
Yes, yes, it's true. You think of great philosophers or people who are pushed to the edge of society, they have a different vantage point. So to go through something incredibly painful and enlightening at the same time, I mean, it does put you in this position to start viewing the world differently. And
yeah.
it sounds like you did, because not your average teenager doesn't meditate 6 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah, that took a little while longer. Yeah, I noticed that state, that, or whatever it was, because I didn't have any words for it. So I just thought, this is an interesting thing. I was still being the teenager sometimes, during that summer, and people didn't necessarily know that there was anything different going on internally, and that was partly by design. I did not want to. I felt like I ought not to share what was happening. Because I didn't want it to be trampled upon, or I didn't want to sort of reveal it to the adult world that I felt still had some sort of polar sway over me. And so I kind of kept it to myself. And then I went back to school in August. And then I really tried at that point. It was starting to fade away, and I thought, oh, let's I want to be the normal person again. I want to kind of get back on the track that I was on
That never
before.
works.
It did not work. To other people, it looked like it was working. I did all these things, and it was class president and this and that, and it was really running a convincing act on others and myself. But I was miserable. I was absolutely miserable, and I just didn't know why. And so when the next summer came, I was really like, okay, now I've got the time and space. Let's see if I can use these 3 months to kind of try to find what the hell was happening. So I started doing a lot of extreme sort of stuff. I figured I got to get back to that place, whatever the hell it was. And maybe it was proximity to death that triggered some sort of tripped me into a different gear. So I started kind of cautiously, I would there were some retaining walls in my town that had sandy beach at the bottom of them. I figured, okay, I'm not going to kill myself here, but it's still going to be scary as hell. So I would jump off of them, and I would be on a friend's property they had a golf cart, and say, like, let's get this up to 20, and then I would jump out, and so to see if that would do something. And I was in a car once of an older teenager, and I just bailed out the door onto
Oh my
the
goodness.
street. And it was just like, it didn't work. It didn't work. And I was like, when actually it was the golf cart that kind of made me decide to stop, because I forgot that you're supposed to roll when you jump out of a moving vehicle and hit the surface. And I just jumped onto my 2 feet, and then found gravity, just all my
Oh.
weight went on this arm, and I thought, oh shoot, I broke my left arm now. And I didn't. So I decided to take other means. I started to tell strangers or anybody who I was afraid to tell embarrassing secrets, and embarrassing feelings. I would just, without any hesitation, start telling them. And I decided, if I can be as honest as I can, let's see if that works. And that actually brought me a little bit into presence, but it did not deeply. So it was grace that kind of came in. I was tagging along with my older sister as I tended to, and she was home from college, and she wanted to get some incense at the metaphysical store. So I actually had no interest in metaphysical bookstores, despite all the mystical and esoteric things I like. They just, I would see the window, and I'd see incense and dream catchers and angels, and I just wasn't interested in those things. But I went in with her like a dutiful little brother, and she was looking, and I kind of went to the back to the books and just opened some up at random on sort of Himalayan yogis and their experiences, and I just opened to a page, and it sounded an awful lot like the territory that I was experiencing. So at that moment, I was like, oh my God, this, it was just like a bell went off inside me, and I was picking up on my homing signal, that, and there was such the hairs went off on my body, and there was such a pull in my heart. And so I basically stayed in. I made myself a very frequent visitor to that metaphysical bookstore for the next 2 years, and yeah, then I was read everything I could.
And what was your first meditation like? I mean, you write that there were sometimes 6 hours. I mean, did you jump right into that?
Oh hell no! I was still, yeah. So I was still trying to keep one foot in the normal world, and one foot in the what I call the crazy monk that I sort of felt within me. And
Right.
I was not necessarily wanting to be that, because I didn't want to sort of totally let those desires out, because God knows where it was going to take me. So I was trying to do things very gradually. I was even a little bit afraid of meditation, because I thought that I did have a very busy mind, and I thought my mind was a good mind, and I didn't want to lose my mind. And some of the Buddhist books I read were actually quite confusing to me, because they would say, and then in enlightenment you will no longer exist, or something like that. And it's like, well, what's the point of it then? How is that? It's just my mind just did not have the subtlety to kind of read between the lines and get at what they were talking about. And so yeah, it took a little while. I remember my first session, I wasn't trained by anybody. I'd watched the film. I love the film The Little Buddha, and I just sort of like aped what they were doing. I went out to the nature preserve in my town and sat down in the best version of lotus posture I could, and you know just started doing it, and not really to any great effect, but I was a little bit proud that, okay, I've journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So it's, really, okay, we started. And so it was just gradually over the next few years, different, I was doing a lot from books, and I had some mentors come into my life who taught me all sorts of different kinds of things. And then eventually at age 17, it was just in me. I was thinking, I really need to do this, because I was sure that at that point that the purpose of human life, and perhaps maybe my life in particular, since I was feeling it so, was to really experience these higher states of consciousness. Because I at that point I realized how gummed up I was again. I'd read a book previously that told me that most of my problems were because I was shooting myself in the foot, and it had to do with my own ego. And I threw it across the room. I said, like, "What do you know about my life?" And it actually hit the wall, and it landed on the floor. And for the next year, I didn't move it. I didn't touch it. I didn't move it. It was there in the same spot. I would walk around it and kind of look at it. And then after about a year of thoroughly making mistakes that I knew were all on me, then I picked it up again, and I started doing some meditation practices.
And eventually this evolved into a practice that, and I love this, you write that it gets people to the quickest possible growth and awareness. And I think a lot of people ask near-death experiencers, I want to have a near-death experience. I want to have this expanded consciousness. I want to be there. And so usually we do say meditation, keep meditating, keep meditating. And eventually, like there will be this break, there will be this moment where you're, out of your body, or you're just in this other realm, and meditation offers that. But how do you get people there quickly, that quickest possible growth? What do you do in that meditation, and how did that evolve?
Sure. So I was like having, before the one that I teach now and been practicing for a while, I was doing all these sort of efforting practices and breathing, and which I think are good meditations, but it would be like, at the end of a 2-hour session, when I'd almost exhausted myself at night, that I would fall into this space that I knew from the car accident and from childhood. That'd be like, oh, finally, and then it was like I kind of was, the way I was doing it, I was kind of exhausting myself until I let go. Um, and so I was kind of, at a certain point, I'd gotten a hold of Yogananda's Autobiography of a Yogi, and when somehow opening that book was just, worlds were being opened within me, and my heart was being just filled with this sense of possibility, and with this connection to the deep love that Yogananda poured into it. And somehow I knew that I could be effortless, that there was an effortlessness to this, that there was something innate about experiencing higher states, that we're not going against the grain, we're actually going more with the grain. And so he also made this promise in the book that if you pray to Babaji, Babaji will hear you. And I said, like, oh yeah? He was like, I trust you, Yogananda. So I was talking to Babaji like a crazy man at night. I'm saying, like, to whom it may concern, please help me find my path. I know what I'm doing right now is not the fastest, and it's not optimal. So I will be as receptive as I can, and like, anything that can help me sort of move in this direction is much appreciated. And so it didn't take long before my sister and I founded this thing called the Lake Geneva Metaphysical Society, and one of the people that the first person that we thought we should invite, named Josiah, we invited him to that, and he did this practice called the Ishayas Ascension. And I had actually talked to him about it. It must have been 8 months before, because a mutual friend who worked at the grocery store thought we should, talk to each other. And at that time, I was actually doing that teenage thing where I was pretending to know what he was talking about, but really really didn't. I was 16 or so, and so now, like a year and later, we have him at the Metaphysical Society meeting, and at the end of it, we're doing a meditation. I'm doing my practices. He's doing this thing. I could tell that, he was touching into presence. It was palpable, and I was like, okay, this guy's as serious as I am, in this sense. And he later ended up marrying my sister.
Oh
Actually,
wow.
yeah, they went home and they talked for hours, and so he became a regular, fixture at the house. And sometimes they had a late bedtime. It was like they would go to bed at 3 a.m. I would get up at 3 a.m. We'd often pass each other on the stairs, me going down, them going up.
Oh.
And so I wasn't planning to do his practice. I was really kind of very stubborn and committed to what I was doing. But then one day, I was coming home from doing my little, I founded the Lake Geneva Environmental Society too, so it just consisted of me picking up garbage, and that's all it consisted of, from the creek and from the streets. And so I came home, and he just said, "Hey, we're going to go to a course in Minneapolis this weekend, and I've got some extra money in my bank account to pay the course fee. Do you want to come?" And I just said yes. There was just such a feeling to say yes. And so what made this different from all the trying was that it's a sort of a mantra based practice. There's everybody has different dispositions, so I never like to proselytize or force my practice down people's throats or something. But it's a mantra based practice, and it's meant to be done effortlessly, in that like previously I had this understanding that the mind was kind of like a monkey that sort of needs to be controlled. And that made sense to me. I thought, oh yes, you have to first learn concentration, and then once you're able to do that, then you'll be able to kind of relax into deeper strata. But this practice was completely different philosophically. It was, no, don't control the monkey. Instead, you want to give it something that's pleasing. You want to feed it ideal bananas, and preferably seed thoughts that have a tendency, instead of moving the mind outward, that just seem to have the strange natural tendency of pulling the mind down into more relaxed, fundamental, vaster states of awareness, back to the source of the mind itself. And so I was so skeptical that these short little phrases that were actually in English and based on appreciation, gratitude, and love, when they put them up on the board in the class, I was very skeptical. It's like, I've come here for this, but then the teachers, looked over at me. They must have been a little bit psychic or intuitive, because they said it will even work if you actively disbelieve in it. And it's just, yeah, that was kind of cool. And so, there I was, closing my eyes, following their really nice instructions. And I was thinking, oh my God, I'm in a class with middle-aged, lazy spiritual seekers, who just want a quick fix, all sorts of thoughts like that. And then all of a sudden, I was thinking, oh, this is probably bullshit. And then I was there. I felt it was as if this silent presence welled up or came from some sort of subterranean spring within my consciousness, within my body. And I was completely immersed in it. And yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, when people have trouble with meditation, that sounds like a great tool for them. And I use that. So it's weird. I don't know if you feel this way in your practice now, but if I'm in a good place, I can just go, into meditation, and I don't really need any help. I'm just there in that beautiful place. But if I've had a really trying day, or I'm really stressed out, or I'm agitated, then I do need a mantra, or I do need, something that kind of gets me there. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh.
But, like
Yeah.
better psychological states don't require as much of that when you're practice, I guess, with meditation.
Yeah, maybe yes, maybe no. I think, yeah, generally that could be the case. That is something I did have liked about the Ascension practice, is that you can enter it from wherever, and it's just as
Yeah.
good. Like it's not any better if you're happy. It ain't any better if you're sad or pissed off or whatever. It's like mechanical that way,
Oh,
and
neat.
that it's like it'll work no matter how you feel about it. I like that, because I felt myself like a bit of a spiritual scientist. So anything that would work despite me was good.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I found that out throughout my practice. It wasn't long after I learned that practice. I mean, it was the end of the course. I came up to the teachers and said, "Hey, do you have a monastery? I can be prepared to leave my home and come to your monastery within 48 hours." Just because I was already kind of set up for it. I'd given away most of my possessions. I turned my room into a little monk's
Wow.
quarters. And so but it was 3 months, about 3 months later, eh? Yeah, 3 months later that I found myself, I was already living in Seattle, moved there from Wisconsin, and then there was this there were a couple of different monastery type places associated with this practice. One up in BC where I'd kind of be an illegal alien, and one down in Oregon. And my heart was pulling me to this Oregon place, and I went down there and kind of spent the next 6.5 years living in a meditation community in Oregon and other places around the world. Yeah.
Wow.
And so that there was yes, that was a bit of a digression too. There was that that sense of I remember we had this little cafe that we worked in, like a monk run cafe, and we were sensitive to the energies that we put in the food, and often customers would come and say like, "Oh my God, I can sense the energy in these potatoes or this bread." As one day I was really pissed off because the convection oven wasn't working. And that was like that for the and it was breakfast, and I needed all these potatoes to get cooked quickly because they're in every dish. And I was kind of the chef at the time. I was swearing up a storm. I was like, "Oh, fucking stupid potatoes," and whatever else. And I could probably be heard a little bit. And one of the my co-monks, came in to the ticket window and said like, "Hey, Ishtar, like they're going to feel that energy you're putting in the food," And I was like, no, don't worry. I've been, even though this is what's coming out of my mouth and you can probably feel the feelings here, I've been using the techniques with the eyes open, like you can. And I've been touching this deeper place. I just need to have I just need to swear a little bit to kind of move this energy. And it's like, it's going to be okay. And she was pretty much, I think she was a little betting that, like I was going to be screwing up the energy of these potatoes. And so what was interesting that day was, maybe she was right. So I put the breakfast out. Eventually the potatoes got cooked, through some miracle of the non-convection oven. And so this was the only time that actually customers came to me personally at the ticket window, showing me their clean plates. And one gentleman who'd had, one of the batches in question, came and said, I'm not usually sensitive to energies, but these potatoes are there's something in these potatoes. Are you all monks? I think you're monks or something like that, but what have you did to these, that was amazing. And then, two other people kind of came back with their compliments. And I won't call it a smirk, but I kind of gave a little, look like that to my interlocutor. And it's kind of like, yeah, I told you so, And so, that stuck with me, that there's a sense, because often as a younger teenager, I was trying to better myself. I would look at my bad habits, and I was really trying to be mindful of, using the right words, having the right energy in my interactions, being really, trying to be outwardly kind in as many ways as possible. But sometimes that would just get exhausting. Or I had this little book, for instance, before all this, where I would put my faults down, and if I committed one of them, I'd put a check mark in it. And so I know I was crazy, but really earnest about it. But with this practice, it was as if, before there's this quote by Henry David Thoreau that's kind of goes, "For every 1,000 striking at the leaves of evil, there's one striking at the root." And in a sense, with this practice, it was just, I was, instead of trying to take care of the leaves and the branches of the tree of my life, I was just feeding the root constantly, just watering the root. And I didn't have to pay as much attention to every little, potential fault. And they just had a tendency of smoothing themselves out for the most part.
I love that metaphor. And, near-death experiences are often very simple in the wisdom. And a lot of times the wisdom is very simple, get to the core of something. And when you're focusing on the core of love that we are, and the core of awareness that we are, then everything kind of works itself out in a sense, that when that is there. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
There's something that you wrote that I wanted to ask you about. And you write about consciousness, being more aware of consciousness unfolding through patterns and archetypes. And, as an English professor, I love archetypes and, talking about these patterns. And could you tell me a little bit more about what conclusions you came to that brought you to that place?
Oh boy, I'll do my best. I'll do my best.
Yeah, in like 5 minutes, just like sum it up.
I'll try to be cogent and interesting here, not try to avoid gobbledygook. But well, okay, I'll put it like this. I'll start. At least I'll start here. Um, you know, from that, the NDE especially, and then the meditation afterward, as if put me into this deeper, calmer strata of my nervous system, and from that place, all the chatter of the mind that was there before, much of it really subsided, and so from that place, it was like the perceptions became more refined or clearer because there was less clutter in the way, and what really started to become more and more apparent was what we're as if sort of, and I'm a bit of a Platonist anyways, so I'm predisposed to these sorts of things. Where there these, I started seeing these underlying patterns that seem to be moving in people's lives, and not necessarily in a surface, which isn't so bad. I keep seeing 111 everywhere, which sometimes I think is a window into an underlying reality. But if it's taken just from the surface, it's a very different experience than if there's that proximity to that silence and that deep calm. There's a lot more that can be seen from that place. And so more and more people, things, objects, trees, there was a sense that behind them is this vast sort of, first of all, there's that vast presence at the bottom of everything, but in between the presence and the tree, there are all these like structures or geometries that seem to be kind of giving rise to the forms that we're more attenuated to seeing, from our conditioning. And reality can often be a very musical thing, in the sense that like, for instance, people, they give off, everybody can tell that different people give off different feelings, or different a
Different
different sort of
vibes, as we
different
say.
vibes. Yeah, exactly. And it was just more of like a deepening, or a refinement, or a, of seeing and feeling into people's vibes. That they became more three-dimensional, more layered. There was more precision, and sort of almost like teasing out different, just like different parts in a symphony, different parts in the symphony that people are putting out. And so, yeah, those like larger patterns are what I would kind of call archetypes in the Jungian sense. And yeah.
So not the typical, I mean, or maybe you did you see like the typical archetypes, like, oh, he's very much a warrior, or oh, she's very much a priestess, like archetypes in that sense? Like, did you see that too?
Some some of that, yeah, some of that, yes, absolutely. But maybe sometimes there are other patterns that I don't quite have read those broad-based ready words for. Maybe they became even more specific. There's a sense like some people, it just seems that their background music is Wagner. And other people, their background music is Vivaldi. People are carrying it, those both, or Tchaikovsky. Some
do
people
you
have
do
the.
you, do you hear Mozart in mine?
Oh, there's a lot actually. We got through that question. I'm seeing, I'm seeing a lot of waltzy stuff though.
Oh.
I'm seeing like, also, there are layers of Tchaikovsky and Strauss that are happening, as well as airier stuff like Mozart. But it feels more feely than Mozart. Mozart could be a little airy. There's more feeling, so hence I go with Tchaikovsky.
Oh yeah.
For you a bit.
Cool.
And yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah, and Debussy as well.
Oh
I mean,
yes.
there's a real, and maybe Satie a little bit, but there's a real kind of watery, but air and water kind of coming together with enough fire to kind of have some cymbal crashes and
Nice.
strong gestures.
I get it now. I get it how you're seeing the music in someone.
Yeah,
That's cool.
That's
Yeah, and it kind of lends itself to astrology, which you said you ended up getting involved in too. Like, I guess, as you were saying, air and water and fire.
Yeah, I
I,
know. I'm speaking astrologies here a little bit. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, most of my life, of course, I was always interested in that sort of thing from a kid. But for a while, first I had was raised with a very scientific mind. I thought, oh, this is fun, but it's probably BS, or most definitely BS. I had a very ambivalent view to it. Then, later on, I was like, okay, I think there's something here, but this is not going to give me ultimate freedom from suffering. This is not going to be a quick path for me to get into presence. And so I kind of shelved that and many other things. And then after really sort of kind of having that presence, become a um, stable thing in life, then it was 2015. I'm in Vancouver, BC. Like let's dive into astrology a little bit again. I had a dear friend named Rob Inglis up there, who's a longtime Zen meditator, but also poses as a astrologer and fortune teller, as he describes it. And we had some fun, and my previous interest in astrology was really rekindled, and I realized that this is just the language of archetypes. And I dug deeper into Jung's fascination with it, and I'd always been fascinated with Jung and the psychoanalyst because that's what my mother trained in before she passed and worked as a therapist. And so I was like, I've felt all of these structures, in people without having the knowledge in my head. And this for me is almost like a lens through which I can sort of refine my perceptions of the inner dynamics of people and in some ways the broader dynamics of society. And so it became, I dove into it, and I read, worked with Rob, and I read as many books as I could, and I started giving sort of free readings for friends and family or by donation. And then it started to seem like, I think I'm doing a pretty good job here. So I decided, well, okay, I'll put out a shingle and, I'll kind of, do this as well. And so that, that kind of developed some steam over the last few years.
Yeah, and for people who've never had their chart done, I always say, "Oh, get your full chart done," because that makes so much more sense.
Oh my God! Yeah, newspaper astrology and most internet astrology is crap.
Right.
I mean, my friends would say all astrology is crap, and they're fine, reasonable people, but I can't agree. But
right.
Yeah,
when I got my full chart done, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense because, I'm a Capricorn, but I don't really resonate with that. But I'm a Sagittarius rising. I have like 5 fire signs in my chart. And I'm like, okay, that makes more sense.
That you kind of have to combine it's an archetypal language with sort of 3 layers of different archetypes. You have a planet, you have a sign, and you have a house. And to kind of get at a astrological atomic bit, there has to be a synthesization of all 3 of those archetypes, and then you can start building a really good interpretation of the dynamics of a chart. So the full chart is essential.
Right. And then how it transits in certain parts in your life. There was an astrologer who interviewed me, and she actually looks at where near-death experiences hit the chart. And mine was definitely in my chart, at 22 when it happened. And so that, like, there was even, a capacity for accidents and for, various things.
Oh, yeah.
But I find that interesting too. Like some astrologers are studying, those spiritual set points that maybe we come in planning those.
Right. I definitely, and I so felt that my NDE was planned as it was happening, especially with the precognition. But there was always a sense that life was a bit script-like. I couldn't ever fully commit to either a deterministic view or a view where I had full a random sort of choice, a free will. I kind of thought both were poor terms for what's really happening. Like our linguistic nets at that level are just not prepared to grasp the actual mechanics of reality.
Yeah, well said. So I would like to just end and let you talk about what it is you think that people need most from you. So what are you often getting asked from people? Is it their suffering that they want to release? Like we all get these questions, I think, as near-death experiencers. And what are you finding that people are asking you, and what are you providing through your knowledge?
Well, I think I provide a means so that people don't have to have a near-life experience. My near-death experience made me realize that I wasn't, even as a 13-year-old, I wasn't really living. That was the big thing. It was like having a 50-pound bag of potatoes taken off me that I didn't even know was there. All of that fear, all of that anxiety, that all of those times I would go into fight or flight, and there was no saber-toothed tiger around. There was no use for that adrenaline. It was just being wasted on neuroses and anxiety, and that was there because I had forgotten who I really was, and that's the human condition. So what my main work, and I think the main positive service that I can be helpful with people, is just to teach them how to fish, in the sense of teaching a good method to come back into that wholeness that we all know, even if we've forgotten it, even if we've been 60 years making ourselves suffer and kind of tightening our nervous system up. It doesn't have to take 60 years or 60 lifetimes to unwind and at least begin to connect in and experientially, not in some sort of, is this really happening or is this my mind stuff sort of way, but in a real sort of felt, palpable shift into presence and being. And that to me is what we're here for. Ultimately, is we're here to come back to that. We're all the prodigal sons and daughters of God, and we're just, the kingdom of heaven is all around us everywhere. And the only thing that's keeping us from seeing it are these conditioned patterns of resistance that for no fault of really anybody, we've just picked up and kind of perpetuate. But once we kind of remember how to naturally kind of dive back into that source, and we keep up with it, then it's almost like a fait accompli, and it's just a matter of time, how much time we have left, and using our time in the most productive way possible.
That's beautifully said. And I don't want to leave people with just that, though. Like, what are some tips that people can do to get to that space of letting anxiety go and really feel that presence in your experience?
Okay. Well, I'm biased. Find a meditation that's going to work for you. And sometimes it's hard to know. If you haven't tasted enough chocolate, it's hard to know what the good chocolate is. So that's a dilemma. And I'm not just going to say like, eat my chocolate, or whatever like that. But really go, commit some time to it. Give yourself the permission to, if you have to throw everything, including the kitchen sink, at this area, but sit down, meditate consistently, regularly. Just like it's like playing the piano. It's better to do a couple sessions of 15 minutes on either end of the day than it is to just go a whole week and then put 2 hours on a Sunday. Little bits of regularity are so important. Just little immersions, little baptisms into spirit. So commitment is the most important thing. And also, being innocent with yourself is what I tell to every single one of my meditation students. In this case, when I first showed up at the monastery, I was out of high school, and so they were always telling me, "Don't grade your own paper, Ishtar." And there's, and I was still I was real innocent, but even then, give yourself the permission to experience life as if you're a child again. And because often in sort of the meditation game, all of that self-checking that we've learned to utilize in our life is sometimes not particularly helpful, because we're sort of it's our natural state, but in some ways it's also a bit of an undiscovered country. We're coming back into it, and we don't always actually know that. It's like traveling from Illinois to Wisconsin. We don't always often know that we're in Wisconsin until we hit Milwaukee, and we're about an hour in at that point. And so be easy on yourself in that sense, but at the same time, have a little fire and commitment to it, because you'll need it. It's sometimes we have challenges and tests that come up along the way, and we have to show what we're committed to and stick to it. And when we do that, it's as if some door opens to us in just the way that Campbell talks about it. When you're committed, the forces of grace will descend into your life and meet you, and doors will open that you didn't even, in places where you didn't even know.
Beautiful. And I love that idea of I was told to be like a little child and in my near-death experience. And so I've pondered, there's great wisdom in simple statements like that. I was like, well, what does it mean to be like a little child? But I think it is that access to presence and that access to not judging the self, and just you almost have to play to some degree to get into that space. And when you can do that, you get there quicker in this weird way, because you're not there's not all that, oh, is this really right? Am I doing it right? And, like there's not that judgment.
I will share a little bit more. I don't know how much time we have, but this is funny. It must have been a week or two after coming to this monastic community in Oregon. I billed myself to myself, and it was as Mr. Intense. We're going to get this enlightenment thing by just being so intense, and so ascetic. And I started having this dream where I was in a forest, and there was a little boy, looked like me at 6 years old, and he was just joy-filled and mirthful. And I kept in the dream trying to chase him, but the harder I chased him, the more elusive he became. And so it must have been the third night that I had this dream that I kind of woke up in it, and I realized, oh, that's what I've been striving hard for. I'm just not going to chase him. And then he came right up to me. So there's kind of, like the Buddha had to find his middle path. He couldn't be a crazy ascetic, but he couldn't also be lazy. But if we kind of, are consistent, take care of ourselves, but at this and have that fire, but are innocent, then, it's like God, consciousness, whatever you want to call it, it's trying to come to us.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and so many things tend to blend in that space. Like people talk a lot about manifestation, and I think that's a key place to manifest. That
Yeah.
if you're in this place of play and happiness and joy,
Yeah.
like a kid, but also doing the work.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, it's like what a great martial artist or a dancer or an athlete is going for. You've done the preparation, you've got this muscle memory, but if you play too hard, it just won't work. But if you play loose, if you're in that silent space, if you're in that open place, then you're going to play the best, and then you'll hit those notes every time.
yeah, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for talking with me. This has been beautiful. Loved it.
Thank you, Trish. It's absolutely my pleasure.
And for those of you watching, you can find more about Ishtar and his practice and his events around the country, actually. So I'll have those links below, and I'll have my writing workshop links and link to the book below. But thank you very much, and may you be blessed.